Say you are a beekeeper based in Corvallis, for example. You go click Corvallis or you click at least a Willamette Valley, when you see you have an orange pollen that is coming in June. So you click on a Phenology reel, you check in that area what are the potential orange pollens that may have come in May, June, or July within a 3-month range. And then you look at your sample and you could potentially click on it and see, all right, these are the plants that it must have come from.
From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and people like you who are making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Associate Professor of Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. Beekeepers often think about nectar flows. Nectar flow is a period of time when nectar from plants becomes so abundant that the bees start to accumulate it in their combs, resulting in the production of a surplus that many of us know is honey. But there's another floral resource that honeybees collect, pollen, that is a little bit harder for beekeepers to get a handle on. For one thing, the amount of pollen entering a colony doesn't appreciably add to the weight of the colony in the same way that nectar does. For another, as the source of nutrients for the developing larval bees, it's never quite clear how much pollen is enough. To help us get a handle on the problem of understanding pollen flows, I am welcoming back Dr. Priya Chakrabarti Basu. Dr. Chakrabarti is an assistant professor at the Department of Agricultural Science and Plant Protection at Mississippi State University. Many of our listeners will remember her from her time as a postdoctoral fellow at Oregon State University and know she has a deep interest in bee nutrition, as the OSU Honeybee Lab is a real leader in bee nutrition. She has kept that tradition going as she's moved to Mississippi. In this episode, we hear about a new initiative in her lab to develop a national pollen phenology wheel, which will help make pollen flows a lot less mysterious, as well as some tips on how you can get involved with adding to this phenology wheel. So let's get ourselves dusty with pollen this week on Pollination. Well, welcome back, Dr. Chakrabarti, to Pollination. I can't remember how many times we've had you on, but I think you have like one of the most popular episodes here on the podcast. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Melathopoulos. It's amazing to be back, and thank you for inviting me back.
Everybody loves hearing from you. And today I was excited you made a quick trip through the Pacific Northwest were able to visit. And during that trip, I learned a little bit about a project that you have ongoing in Mississippi that you're looking to expand on pollen. And I mean, it's fascinating to me because as beekeepers, we pay so much attention to the honey flows, how many pounds per day are coming into the colony. But pollen flows, I think, are a little more mysterious. So let's just back up. What do we know about the main pollen flows, both in Mississippi, but also here in the Pacific Northwest? What are some of the pollens that come in of large quantity that we should be watching for?
I think you're spot on that we really understand, or rather, we really try and make sense of the nectar flows in the landscape, because, of course, producing honey, it's more concrete and you can actually put a value to it. But when it comes to pollen, the brood in the colony, it needs a ton of pollen to be able to grow, and the colony needs pollen to expand overall. So understanding the pollen flow in an area is very important for a lot of different reasons.
I love the way that you put it there. The honey, we know the value of it, but the value of that pollen coming in is a little bit more, little harder to resolve.
True. It's kind of a little hard to put a metric on it, but pollen in the long run is as important for the colony as is honey, because pollen provides the important protein, lipids, fats, minerals, phytosterols, so many different types of macro and micronutrients that pollen provides to the colony. That is certainly needed by the developing larvae. So, going back to your question about trying to make sense of pollen flow in a landscape, let me maybe first start with Mississippi. In this region, we have some idea about during a particular time of the year, which are the plants that may be blooming in the landscape that can be good sources of pollen. So, for example, we know that it can be warmer here down in the southeast compared to the northwest. So, our bloom times are slightly different than what you might anticipate. In the Pacific Northwest, our maples start blooming sometime around mid-January. Then we also
Oh,
have
wow.
pendants. We might have some wild flowers growing in the landscape, like dandelions, wild mustard. Uh, a large pollen flow also comes in from the redbud. But interestingly, a lot of the flowers that bloom here throughout the year, they can provide both pollen and nectar to the bees. Back in the Pacific Northwest, I would say because it is a little bit colder than what we see here in Mississippi, most likely the first pollen comes in from hazelnut.
Oh, yeah.
Probably around, I would say, the first 2 weeks of February. You might correct me on that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, as far as I'm aware, hazelnuts are the first pollen bloom that you're about to see. Slowly, as you kind of move into the year, we might get some willows in March. We might also see some dandelions, wild cherries, and maples that start to bloom around end of March and April. And of course, May, June, July, we continue to see a lot of buttercups, blueberries. I might see some blackberries, raspberries, and clovers, and so on. But what is interesting is that in both these regions that I'm talking about, whether the Southeast or the Pacific Northwest, there are periods in the year when we see a dearth in pollen as well as nectar, but certainly a scarcity in bloom. We have this acute shortage of plants in the landscape. For us, it is about midsummer when it's really hot, we don't get any rain, and then we suddenly see this crash that is happening. Nothing is blooming in the landscape, and we need to start seeding our colonies. When I was there back in Corvallis in Oregon, when I was a postdoc there at Oregon State, I remember seeing this intense dearth towards the end of summer, peak summer, end of summer. Is it the same still now? Because I haven't been back there in about 2.5 years other than, just occasional trips. Do you still see that summer dirt?
Yeah, it really hits home after blackberries finish. We have, right now there's Queen Anne's lace and gumweeds and tarweeds, a lot of composites, but there aren't a lot of them. It's not like the spring in the Pacific Northwest when there seems to be more pollen than a colony can handle and the colonies are swarming. Now it seems like the balance is a little bit more, they're really struggling to bring in what they need, I think.
Absolutely. And it was the same for us until about a month ago when we had no rain for many days straight at a time. There was nothing that was blooming. And we actually saw a brood break in our research apiary this year, and we had to feed them some protein supplements. Now that with a bit of rain that came in, we see the colonies bringing in some pollen. A lot of it can also be crepe myrtle from our campus because our research apiary is
Uh,
situated on campus. So a bit of that pollen is also crepe myrtle. But we certainly see these ebbs and flows in pollen as much as we see in nectar, which is why it is really important that we understand a bit of both because they are both equally important in the colony.
well, it raises the question of how do we measure these flows? I know you can trap pollen and I guess you could weigh the amount coming in, but that doesn't tell you what plants there, you were talking about all of these plants of importance. It doesn't tell you where they're coming from. So walk us through the method that you have in this pollen phenology wheel project. How are you getting the data? How do you work this through? How do you kind of get pollen and figure out where it's coming from? How does that happen?
Before I answer your question, and that's a great question, I just wanted to give a bit of context that to identify plants from mixed pollen samples, what we call as forbicular pollen. So these are the pollen samples that honeybee foragers, they are collecting from the landscape. They are bringing it into the colony. We can place a pollen trap at the hive entry, and then the trap sort of collects all of this forbicular pollen from the honeybee's hind legs. So looking at these mixed pollen loads, There are at least many ways that you can identify the plants in these pollen samples. One would be a molecular method, which is based on DNA metabarcoding. It's certainly expensive. Sorry,
DNA meta barcoding? What on earth
DNA
is that?
metabarcoding. So there are some labs that do offer this service, or they have recently started offering this service. It is certainly expensive, needs an established pipeline for processing the samples, and it is cool. What we
So it's kind of like you have there's a library of different plant DNA, and I guess you take the pollen and you somehow use the magic and line them
yes,
up?
uh, uh, yes, that would be a great way of looking at it. I would say yes, absolutely.
Okay.
But we do, on the other hand, is not DNA metabarcoding. I honestly look at this Pollen Phenology Wheel project as one of my two lifelong databases that I want to continue to work on. So I want us to be able to have more collaborators and more volunteers to help us collect pollen, and perhaps in the long run, train more and more people to be able to identify pollen or process pollen samples to streamline the process. This is something that a lab can simply take up and continue to be able to do this with minimal resources. It can also be something that a beekeeper with very minimal resources going through our phenology wheel dataset could also try and identify from minimal resources in his house or in their home. So what we are doing is we are using a procedure called acetolysis. And this involves using a stain, a dye, mixed with acid and a few other chemicals that sort of strips away the outer coat of the pollen grain. So when you're steaming it through this chemical process, it essentially helps you identify visually. So we take pictures under the microscope and we are building onto this data set. So it helps us identify the pollen grain, at least the family and sometimes genus and species. So what we are doing is we have these mixed pollen loads that we are collecting, and I must say that we have a number of volunteers as well as a number of collaborators on this project. Dr. Pierre Lau, who's at USC Stoneville in Mississippi, he's one of my collaborators on this project currently. And I'm hoping that we are going to get more hands on board.
Oh,
So
and
what we are doing,
it's worth mentioning if you are interested as a listener going deeper into this dive on identifying species from pollen, we have the podcast with Pierre Lau from a couple years ago that people can check out. Sorry to interrupt. But keep going.
no, all good. And I know you and we spoke, so potentially we are also going to start working on some PNW pollen sets together. And Dr. Ramesh Savili, who's also at Oregon State University, he and we are also partnering to expand this project. So what we are doing is we have these mixed pollen loads, and I have to say, I have some amazing students in my lab. My students and technicians, they have more patience than I do, and they have a better eyesight than I do. So they sit and they color sort all of that mixed pollen load from every beekeeper, from any location that they have sampled for us, and for every month. So that's what they're doing. They are weighing out the entire sample, then they're color sorting the samples. They are reweighing these individually color sorted samples. They are then assigning each of these colors a Pantone ID. Now, we could have chosen many different ways of designating a color ID, but we decided to go with the Pantone color ID. This is because it's easily available. Anybody can have access to this ID and you can just pick it up from a paint store or order it on Amazon. So we are assigning it a very simple color ID, but we know what color that pollen grain is. We are then, after we have reweighed and we have imaged pollen with the Pantone ID, we then go in and we do acetolysis. Then we are taking images of the different types of pollen grains that we are finding under the microscope. We assign a scale bar so that we know what's the size of the pollen grain. We also assign a magnification number for any researcher or anybody who's interested in the future to look that up. We then upload it all onto a central sort of like a drive where Pierre and our students and us, we are
Huh.
going through these images every day. We are looking at current references that are available and we are eyeing them. So the beauty of this project is it is a bit painstaking if you look at it to start it off. But once we have enough data, this ball sort of rolls itself. Because over the next 3, 4, 5 years, once we have had enough data set to be able to put in our Phenology wheel, sort of this program that I'm envisioning. Say you are a beekeeper based in Corvallis, for example. You go click Corvallis or you click at least a Willamette Valley, whenever we have collected samples from. If
Yeah.
you're looking at the technology wheel, you click on that and you check your hive and you see you have an orange pollen that is coming in June. So you click on a Synology wheel, you check in that area what are the potential orange pollens that may have come in May, June, or July within a 3 month range. And then you look at your sample and you could potentially click on it and see, all right, these are the plants that it must have come from, or it probably came from because it's in the same area around the same time frame. And the pollen looked very similar to this. In addition to not only just identifying the pollen, we are also looking at the protein and the lipid content of the pollen. So that will also give us an idea on the nutritional quality of this pollen, which is an additional value to a lot of beekeepers because we really want to understand the nutritional quality as well as the quantity that is available in the landscape. There is one thing that I should mention, just because this one particular hive is bringing in pollen from, say, plant XYZ, it doesn't mean that plants ABC are not blooming in that landscape.
Right.
But but what we are hoping is that the more we can sample throughout the year and the more locations we have in every region, the more number of hives that our volunteers are trapping pollen from, the more data set that we'll have generated. And the more we can follow this through.
Yeah, the negatives might be actually interesting that there are plants that are blooming that never show up in the pollen traps or show up rarely and they're abundant in the landscape, as opposed to maybe a plant that isn't that abundant but just crams in the pollen trap. It really gives you a sense of, the plants that are really of high value. I was
Mhm.
thinking in terms of if you're a beekeeper and you have property and you want to supplement it and you think, oh, this is a good plant, I guess by using the phenology wheel, you'll be able to really, sort through the options at that time of year and get a sense of
Uh,
what really is, you know, because, I've done this before where I clip an anther and I try to see how much pollen is on it, but it doesn't really give me a good estimate of their ability to collect it, how long it persists, how many weeks it goes for. All of this, I guess, can be answered.
Absolutely. And one thing that we have requested our beekeeper volunteers that if it is possible, they continue to track for us once every month for at least 2 or 3 years. And we switch the week that we are trapping. So it doesn't matter if it's cold and the bees are not going to bring anything in. We still put in a pollen trap. As long as it's not raining, we only trap for once and it's region dependent. Some of my Florida beekeepers who are participating in this project, they can only trap for 24 hours or less because in those regions it is so humid. The pollen
Uh,
becomes wet very quickly. But for a lot of other beekeepers, trapping for 48 hours is what we prefer and they can do it as long as we have bright sunny days, no rain. So we trap once a month for 48 hours from that hive. One hive, a strong colony with brood, has to stay in that location for 12 calendar months. In winter, there is no brood. They are probably not going to forage if it's too cold, and they're not going to bring in any pollen. But we still put a trap on just for, uniformity's sake.
mhm.
What we have asked them to also do is suppose in year one, as a beekeeper volunteer, you can start any time of the year as long as you follow it through for 12 calendar months. And what we're requesting is that if you can participate, please participate for multiple years. So, say in year one, you're trapping from week one of every month. In year two, you're trapping from week two in every month. In year three, you're trapping from week three in every month, and so on. With, of course, we have to be a bit adaptable to the weather as well, but we try and keep this schedule basically. So, what it helps us is not only understanding perhaps plants that we might miss in the landscape because we're trying to also accommodate different weeds over the years, but we're also trying to see if the phenology can shift because of climate change. What is, something we found in year 1 and 2, we stopped seeing it from year 3 onwards in that location. What is something that we found in May is now blooming in March? We don't see it in May anymore. I'm not anticipating something to be that drastic over a 4 or 5 year period, but looking long term, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you can go back to that phenology wheel and we can continue to add more and more regional information to
Well,
that phenology.
and I do remember, I mean, Dr. Mike Berg had a long-term data set on just colony weight gain. And I remember the same thing in Beaver Lodge, Alberta. There was like a 40-year data set on weight gain. And you have years, drastically, you have these patterns, these shifts. There is always this temporal variation year to year. But being able to capture, I guess, those patterns and get a sense on pollen, that would be a remarkable achievement. I don't think I've ever seen that done. And that would really help us understand that key resource and how it's shifting and how the diversity or different plants are responding. I think that would be wonderful.
I'm really hoping that once we've gotten this ball rolling, so I had reached out to Project 8% with this idea about creating this phenology wheel. And I'm glad that they funded us because that is what honestly got the ball rolling. It is it is a regional project that we started with, but the more I started talking to other beekeepers during different beekeeper meetings and other conferences, the more people became interested in participating in this. There are some tools that are available online that can help you understand the phenology in your area. It might tell you what plants are blooming. It can tell you if, pulling data sets from iNaturalist that whether people found bees on these plants or not. But this project is actually ground truthing a lot of that information. If you have a colony here, what can make that ideal habitat for that colony? You can choose a good overwintering yard, you can choose a good holding yard, or you could even simply understand the nutritional quality of that landscape, along with the bloom times and the availability of pollen.
Well, so how do people get involved? So if you're a beekeeper and this is now expanding beyond Mississippi, like how does somebody sign up?
We have beekeepers from actually different regions who are signing up, and the process is very simple. You reach out to me, and I get you connected through this sort of like system that we have created where we have an online form. Me or a student will reach out to you with that online form. We just need basic information from you. For example, your name, a good way to contact you, your mailing address so that we can ship you a pollen trap.
Oh, you get a
Uh,
pollen trap.
yes, you will get
Wow.
a pollen trap from us. And
Who said
we
Mississippi State never gave you anything?
true. We just buy that same type of pollen trap, which we hope is going to be universal for a lot of people to use. The front porch pollen traps. Uh, I wouldn't say the fanciest of the lot, but at least this is something that we can give out in bulk to a majority of beekeepers, and this seems to work for most. So what we do is we then need your address, and you should have access to a chest freezer. It doesn't have to be a laboratory grade freezer as long as it's a chest freezer and the temperatures are colder than your regular fridge freezer. So what you do is basically if you're collecting a sample for us, you pick that first week or the second week, whatever you start off with, and try and stick to that same week for every month for the next 12 calendar months. Every month that you sample, you collect all of the pollen from your trap into the Ziploc bag, label it with your name, location, date, and month of sampling, and stick it in your chest freezer. If you are close to us, this is what we do with a lot of beekeepers from the Southeast region. If you're close to us or to one of our partners, we'll go pick it up from you. If not, we'll arrange a way so that you can ship that pollen to us over dry ice overnight or over ice overnight, depending on what is your feasibility. And so we usually request that you collect at least 3 to 4 months of pollen before we go collect it from you or you ship it to us. It only reduces the time and the cost of shipping or driving to collect the pollen. and then we get to work in the lab, basically. This is what pretty much we do.
Okay, it sounds so they'll contact you at Mississippi State University. From there, you'll send them a form. In the form, they'll be entering some detail. They will then start trapping based on the schedule, collecting the pollen, bulking it up in their freezer until it's ready to ship, and then they'll either you'll pick it up or they'll ship it to you, and then your folks start to go through all the pollen for them.
That's what we do.
Sounds like a great deal, and also being able to provide all that data to populate up this phenology wheel. What I can't think of why anybody wouldn't do it.
Thank you so much. And I'm really hoping that the more samples we collect across the different regions, the better we understand what's happening to the nutritional landscape for the bees.
Fantastic. Well, it's always great talking with you and catching up with you. I hope we're going to have you back on the show as
On the
quickly as
podcast.
possible.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me. It's always great to catch up with you. And I hope all is well in the Pacific Northwest.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links from each episode are available at the website pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's a form at the website where you can pop in and say hello and give me feedback. If you want to support the show, remember to leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcast mothership you use. And finally, if you have the means and you want to help support my lab's effort to document bee biodiversity in Oregon, visit OregonBeeAtlas.org and follow down to the donate button where you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Endowment. Every little bit helps. See you next episode.